The Ruin's Greatsword is one of the coolest and most unique weapon concepts in Elden Ring. Sure, it reaches some of the highest attack ratings, deals some of the highest damage, and has an amazing reach thanks to its weapon skill, but none of these aspects are what makes the weapon truly special. No, it's actually how its damage scales with the primary stats listed on it. So in this video, we're gonna go over everything you need to know to truly maximize its damage potential. Now, the general rule of Elden Ring when it comes to weapon scaling is that whenever there is a hybrid weapon that lists two separate attributes, like for example one in the melee category like strength and dexterity and another one in the magical category like faith and intelligence, usually each one of these affects different aspects of that weapon. So for example, in the case of this one, strength would be the component that affects the melee damage of the weapon, so direct blows with the weapon itself. Meanwhile, the magical component or intelligence would buff the weapon's skill, and that's the norm with most of the weapons in Elden Ring. Something like the Falling Star Beast Jaw obviously deals a lot more damage with its weapon special if you invest a lot more points into intelligence, and there's many other faith equivalents as well. In the case of the Ruin's Greatsword, on the other hand, this is not what happens, and you might be surprised to find out that this is way more pure strength oriented than you were initially led to believe. So here's a few tests that I was able to perform. I initially thought that a 50-50 point distribution into strength and intelligence would be the well-optimized way of playing, and it deals some pretty respectable damage, especially with the weapon skill, 1700 plus almost 1800 against these mobs. But watch what happens when I change things around, only keep intelligence to 16 to meet the minimum requirements, and pour everything into strength over 80. In this case, as you can see, there's a huge benefit of over 250 points for the weapon art itself, which is completely different than any other weapon we have tested in a similar category so far. It doesn't just stop there. I actually wanted to see exactly what happens if I were to push all of that intelligence to 99, and surprise surprise, it still did not even begin to get close to having those 80 points into strength. So at the end of the day, what this means is that the Ruin's Greatsword is actually way better when you get maximum points into strength and completely avoid any intelligence, as they are just wasteful on anything over 16, which again is the minimal you need to even use the weapon special. Now, you might be tempted to believe that that's because of the descaling it has in intelligence, but it's not really true, because there's plenty other weapons out there with a similar scaling in that magical stat that still get major benefits in the weapon art damage from just investing into that, which is again totally not the case with the Ruin's Greatsword. In fact, there's very little upside to even buff your magical damage with this build right here, because there's barely a few points that you get compared to just straight up having a lot more strength and points towards that. So what we're looking at right here, ladies and gents, is pretty much probably the best all-around weapon for pure strength builds. Not only do you get it super early, pretty much at the Radahn Festival, you also get that max rank scaling with strength at level 10. It also gets extremely high damage, since the AR is some of the highest of all colossal weapons. And of course, did I mention that you get the range spell on it that doesn't even scale with intelligence, so you literally don't have to waste any points into that past the 16 you need to wield it in the first place. So here are some of the other items that I'm using with this build. Obviously, since we are a high strength warrior kind of build, I wanted a lot of points into resistances and poise, so I went with the scaled armor. But if you get more endurance, you can obviously go for something heavier like the veterans, so that's a matter of options. When it comes to the talismans, the only pure damage one is the Shard of Alexander for that 15 or so additional damage for weapon skills. When it comes to the second one, I'm going with the Star Scorch Heirloom. Now, why am I going with this one and not a magical Scorpion Charm, for example, which would technically speaking increase the magical damage of the weapon? Well, the reason is because even though the magical Scorpion Charm does increase the damage, it's barely half, even less than that, compared to just having those extra 5 points from the Star Scourge heirloom, which is why I just went with a lot more strength. As I've said, having as much strength as possible with this build is pretty much key, so if you can go to 99, go to 99. When it comes to some of the others, I also went with the Earth Tree Favor. This just raises maximum HP, stamina, and equip load, which is exactly what I need. And finally, of course, I also went with the Great Jar Arsenal so that I can wield those armor sets. This is going to be a pretty heavy build, so you will need quite a lot of that. Yeah, we're not going to use any source seals simply because there's going to be too much resistance penalties when using that at this level, and if you even couple it with like the Blood Boil aromatic, you will literally go below 0, so like minus 10%, which is definitely not desirable. Like this, you get about 30% resistance into almost everything, so it's definitely helpful, since in this case I was exclusively playing on Journey 2. In terms of some of the other items, when it comes to buffs, I've been using a physic tier with the knot that gives us 10 more points into strength, which makes me reach 90 points total. And also something that buffs magical damage. There's nothing else in this case that would work, maybe with the exception of the one that buffs damage with subsequent hits. It can be helpful against bosses like Radagon, for example, where you can dodge and just poke them quite easily. Eventually it will build up that extra damage, but that's a little bit more situational. Also, if you want to take a look at attribute distribution, here is how it looks at 130. If I were to be 125, I would slash those 5 points from mine and just leave it as it is, simply because I wanted a lot more points into mine to cast 6 straight up weapon skills, but you don't need it that much. Now, when it comes to movement, it's actually quite amazing. It borrows most of what makes Colossal Greatswords amazing. Its dodging R1 is also a poke, so this makes it quite amazing against bosses that you can stay close to and predict their attack patterns, like for example Radagon or Melania. In both of these situations, if you stay close, follow with dodges and R1s, you're usually going to just stun them in about like 4 or 5 of these, unless you also get to jump attack and then do it even faster. It's definitely satisfying in both of these situations, and the poke also comes out quickly. You also have the charging R2, which also makes this weapon quite unique. You can pretty much unleash spikes from the ground with a similar gravity spell that further stuns enemies if you want to do something like that. Now, even though this is gravity damage, it's not going to get the benefit from some of the other gravity related spells, which would normally give you a 20% damage increase against targets like Astel, for example. It's no longer the case because I don't think this is even gravity damage. Technically speaking, it's still physical damage. You're just erupting the ground at enemies' feet, and I think that's what counts it as physical damage. Obviously, if you're going against targets that tend to spam attacks a lot and they are a bit more frail, like some of the regular enemies, you can always use the weapon as a shield, which is both amazing at parrying, blocking, and just following up with a repost if you press R2 soon after. Yes, you are going to get a portion of that damage onto your character, but this is a high stamina, high kind of vigor build, so you can more than tank that, and the damage you unleash will be much higher than the enemy can even resist. And even if they do, if you follow with 1 or 2 more quick attacks, it usually results in just completely stunning them. Overall, the Ruins Greatsword is one of the best all-arounders in Elden Ring. It totally has pretty much everything going for it. The max scaling, the high AR, the fact that it deals range damage with no intelligence or faith distribution, and the fact that it's literally one of the best in a pure strength kit is what just puts it in the God tier category. This is it. Totally let me know down below. Have you played with this? Have you created builds around it? Do you like it? And I'll see you guys in the next video.